The pilot episode of Boy Meets World originally aired on September 24th, 1993, as a part of ABC's TGIF, Thank Goodness It's Funny, Friday comedy block. Series co-creators Michael Jacobs and April Kelly wrote it, and veteran sitcom director John Tracy directed. This would be the only Season 1 episode directed by Tracy, as Season 1 direction would be handed off to David Traynor in Season 1 Episode 2 On the Fence. There is a noticeable difference in tone between the pilot and the rest of the season, but it's hard to tell if that's attributable to the director, or just the fact that a pilot episode would need to be handled differently than a typical episode. It's also possible that the pilot presented ideas for how the show would go that the ABC executives didn't approve of, and had Boy Meets World production change it. Short of securing an interview with Michael Jacobs, these are questions that I will not be able to answer conclusively and can only speculate on. The pilot introduces us to 11-year-old Cory Matthews, the boy who shall meet world, played by Ben Savage, younger brother to the Wonder Years' Fred Savage. Cory is a middle child in a suburban household in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has an older brother, Eric, played by Will Friedle, a younger sister, Morgan, played by Lily Nixay, a less-than-stellar child actor, and two parents, Alan, played by William Russ, and Amy, played by Betsy Randall. He goes to Jefferson Elementary School, where he has a group of friends, including Sean Hunter, played by Ryder Strong, as well as a kid named Bornahay and a black girl named Kincaid, who don't make it as characters. I presume they didn't test well and got replaced with Minkus and Topanga, who have very distinctive characters usually unaligned with Cory's interests, thereby allowing the kids to play off of each other better. Cory, Sean, and Bornahay are not very distinctive from each other in the pilot, so it was probably a good decision to cut either Sean or Bornahay. Sean, of course, becomes a major character later on, arguably stealing the show from Cory. But it's interesting to think about what might have happened if Sean were the one cut, and Bornahay developed. As for Kincaid, she's a bit more interesting as a tough girl who doesn't let Bornahay push her around, and I'm not at all sure why she was rejected. Topanga might be more of an original character as the hippie girl, but Kincaid could reasonably have been developed into a tough girl who believes in astrology. They do attempt to replace Bornahay in his role as Cory's second friend with a black boy in On the Fence before rejecting the character entirely, so I don't think it's a racial issue. Nonetheless, this intriguing alternate universe Boy Meets World with Cory, Bornahay, and Kincaid as the main trio would have been far more racially diverse than the Boy Meets World we got, which is pretty much entirely white, until Trina McGee Davis joins the cast as Angela in Season 5. It might not have turned out as such an overtly white cultural product if Kincaid were there. In Season 1, Cory is a very subversive element, which makes him stand out from other sitcom children. He doesn't agree with a lot of what adults tell him he should value, and he always criticizes the status quo. In some ways, this makes him a very refreshing character and interesting to watch. Unfortunately, it also makes him a bit unsympathetic, as his anger at the world can manifest negatively, making him range from an annoying brat to an outright bully. Fortunately, in the pilot, he's only at the brat end of the spectrum. Also among the main characters is schoolteacher Mr. George Feeney, played by William Daniels, who previously portrayed John Adams in the film 1776, and was the voice of Kit the Car in Knight Rider. Mr. Feeney is a stern, authoritarian teacher who mostly fulfills the role of antagonist to Cory's The Subversive Youth, though there is a hint of the kind grandfatherly figure that he grows into. He also lives next door to the Matthews, a point that the pilot emphasizes more than seems appropriate based on where the show went. The pilot seems like it was selling the show as a concept about a boy living next to his most hated teacher, so he can't escape him by going home like most kids. But this device is mostly just used throughout the show as a means of inserting Feeney into more scenes. More often than not, his proximity is used by Cory and Eric to seek advice from him at all hours, annoying him more than he annoys them.
You are not calling a duck!
Cory listens to a baseball game on a radio smuggled into class, making Feeney angry that he's more into sports than his lesson on Romeo and Juliet. So he gives him detention on the same day as a big game. Cory plans to sneak out of detention, but his plans are further hindered by Eric reneging on his promise to take Cory to the game, instead using the ticket for a date with a girl named Heather. This is really jerkish behavior on Eric's part that the show never really acknowledges, which is a general problem with Season 1 that typically applies to Cory. In complaining to his parents about Eric, Cory says a hilarious out-of-context line.
I earned those tickets! I slept with him for 11 years!
It's innocent in context, but the turn of phrase sounds kind of dirty. I can imagine that line being said by a woman going through a divorce. I deserve that car! I had to sleep with that bastard for 11 years! His parents take Eric's side because they support Eric's love life more than Cory's enjoyment of baseball. So he decides to walk out on his family and moves into the treehouse in the backyard. This ends up giving him a view into Feeney's window as he prepares what looks like a romantic dinner for two. Then Feeney gets a call, and, disappointed, he starts eating on his own. Corey starts to feel sympathy even for his arch-nemesis. The emphasis on Feeney living next door may not be fully warranted, but the writing effectively stresses that point without detracting from the plot. Corey thinks that he can get another ticket to the game because there are always guys with extra tickets, which I think is a reference to scalpers. I personally think that scalping should be legalized, but it is criminal, and it's interesting that the show implicitly endorses technically a criminal act. Maybe the censors weren't paying attention. His biggest problem is detention. He doesn't think he deserves it. He tests to see if Feeney would let him go, and Feeney does. Presumably Feeney would punish him later, but he's willing to let Corey walk out without a fuss. Corey then comes back in because he ultimately respects the school as an authoritarian institution. This somewhat lends credence to the joke in Season 4, Episode 13, B&B's B&B, where Corey says he enjoyed getting spanked as a kid because he knew he deserved it. Though at that point in the series, he clearly has had a personality transplant.
Without punishment, my world loses both form and meaning.
Corey complains about detention, and this somehow leads into an argument about love. Corey, as an asexual prepubescent, can't see the value of romantic love. He sees Eric changing his values and Feeney getting scorned, and he thinks that the wise thing to do is to hold on to his childish values. Feeney then just rants about love being the greatest thing of all time, saying that Corey can't possibly understand as a child, and then just puts him in his place. Corey then agrees that love is worth it, moves back in, and encourages Eric to not give up on dating Heather after having one bad date. In the tag at the end, Feeney deliberately lets Corey overhear his conversation with a teacher, in which he reveals that the romantic dinner for two wasn't really that. It was a dinner for him and his sister. The point Feeney emphasizes is that Corey is largely ignorant and should just keep his mouth shut. But it seems reasonable to think that a candlelit dinner for two would be romantic in nature. The twist that it was for his sister honestly doesn't make a lot of sense. It also kind of seems like this episode likes ambiguous incest between siblings.
I slept with him for 11 years!
This episode is nostalgic. That's the main appeal it has for me. It's very representative of the 1990s in its aesthetic, particularly in its costumes. It's hard to believe that people used to dress like that. Unfortunately, it also has an annoying theme of didacticism, where the adults are always right and Corey has to fall in line. Corey's subversive personality distinguishes the character, but the episode doesn't endorse it per se. His attitude makes him appealing to kids who are likely bored of child characters completely accepting of their setting, but he's still presented as an annoying brat who needs to be put in his place by his parents and by Feeney. I feel like the storyline is more for adults who want their kids to behave than for kids who want to watch a boy meet a world. A lot of Season 1 episodes are like that, and that gives them an air of condescension that I really don't like. Part of my problem with the theme is that it presents another family's lifestyle as the only good way to do things. I was homeschooled and basically unschooled as a kid, and I personally find it superior to formal schooling in a lot of ways. When you don't have the same restrictions on teaching as in the formal school setting, you can implement far more effective teaching strategies that incorporate students' interests, and not hold them in this uncomfortable environment for hours. I'm willing to be respectful of another family's way of doing things, but Boy Meets World doesn't just present an alternative. It holds this as the only effective way to raise children, thus making it fundamentally good, and any challenges to it fundamentally bad. The plot presents a fundamentally good status quo, and makes Corey a brat for not respecting it. I think a lot of his complaints are reasonable. If he's not interested in the material, why should he have to follow closely? Wouldn't he be more suited with extended gym lessons instead of drama? Why couldn't he have insight into the human condition as an 11-year-old? Does Feeney have a more compelling answer than, "I'm the teacher and what I say goes"? Because that just makes him sound like a bit of a power freak. And then there is the fact that he treats Shakespeare as high art to be revered, when anyone who actually knows anything about Shakespeare knows that he was extremely crude and shoved a bunch of pop culture references into everything he wrote, making his work equivalent to Family Guy. And then Corey's just put in his place and only respects love as a concept because Feeney orders him to. He doesn't really learn anything about love, just that he should respect authority. This gives the whole episode an air of condescension. Corey's subversiveness is ultimately fake subversiveness. He complains, but he complies. He moves out, but not really. He stays in detention even though Feeney doesn't stop him. The episode flirts with him being more independent than a standard sitcom kid, but it ultimately shows that he is a good kid because he learns to embrace the status quo. That makes the episode really get on my nerves. The episode does a good job of establishing the setting and characters, but only Corey and Feeney end up particularly compelling. We understand that these other characters exist, but they're not given focus in the same way as Corey and Feeney, and we don't know why we should like them yet. Ironically, the most interesting side character is Kincaid, who doesn't show up again. The character of Season 1 that I find most annoying overall is Morgan, as Lily Nixay just really isn't that good of a child actor.
How come he called me a demon child?
But John Tracy does a better job at directing her than David Traynor, making the pilot stand out as having the best Morgan performance in the season. I personally consider Morgan a superfluous element, just there to give Boy Meets World a cuteness appeal that it doesn't really need. And I think that the show would be tighter if Corey and Eric were the only children, but that's just me. The pilot isn't very good. If it were to air today, I probably wouldn't watch the show. Even at the height of my Boy Meets World obsession, it was one of my least liked episodes. At the same time, however, it deserves the basic respect for launching the show. Even if Boy Meets World is a condescending 1990s mess now, the pilot lays the groundwork for the fantastic character-focused dramedy it becomes.
Now I get it.